Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's another day, it's another dollar, and the ANC is still retarded because the news that the ANC gets up to constantly retarded. I mean, I don't think they can really help themselves at this point in time. And this comes after Durko. Remember Islamist-controlled Durko? Well, they've declared the Israeli ambassador. We don't really have an ambassador as such, but we have a person in charge of that office, or at least the ministry. That's the Israeli liaison to South Africa. Well, that individual named Ariel has been made persona non grata. So basically, he's been kicked out of the country. Now, Durko cited repeated violations of diplomatic norms and the Israeli embassy's social media posts which attack President Cyril Ramaphosa, and their failure to notify Durko of visits by Israeli officials. Now, keep that in mind, failure to notify Durko of visits by Israeli officials. Now, part of the reason that they don't get notice of Israeli officials, or at least notice of it, who's attending, is because the government incredibly anti-Israeli, and that is stopping the Israelis doing anything positive in the country. And I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. Now, Ariel's been given 72 hours to leave South Africa. That's the usual when you've basically lost your diplomatic credentials. Now, Israeli diplomats, this is where it all kind of comes together. Well, they met the Umbatembu king. Now, if you've watched my videos, you will recall this is the king that went to Israel. He looked around Israel and he said that the South African government was nuts, specifically with their case with the ICJ. He came back and told the media that they were corrupt and he swore everybody. It was very amusing. I did some videos on it. Now, having come back from Israel, he met with over 50 traditional leaders and he brought Israeli diplomats to meet them so that they could foster some kind of relationship. The idea effectively being that the South African government, the ANC, is anti-Israel, but them and their traditional communities, they're not. Now, the Israeli embassy shared videos of those meetings on social media. Now, the reason that the king had actually brought these officials to meet these traditional leaders was because he stated that he wanted to use Israel to assist with water infrastructure, health, and agricultural assistance, all areas that the South African government, specifically the ANC, has neglected. Now, these traditional leaders and the Israeli diplomats visited hospitals and universities. Now, the Israeli officials visited even Nelson Mandela Bay Academic Hospital and Walter Sisulu University, and they made donations to many public hospitals in order to improve the facilities there. Now, in response to that, the provincial government, the Eastern Cape Premier, Oscar, another corruption accused, that individual, the provincial government says that they weren't informed. And they said that the visits occurred without provincial approval. Was if somehow they're the kings of the country and they can dictate who does and does not come into the country. Now, the Premier stated that foreign relations fall under Durko and not traditional leaders, even though Durko has made a policy decision that many of these traditional leaders don't agree with. And as a result of that, where they could get assistance from abroad, such as in this instance, they can't because Durko is ideologically captured. Now, the Health MEC was instructed to investigate acceptance of these donations to these public hospitals. And as you can imagine, they're all having a complete fit because Israel's doing something that they themselves aren't. Now, the embassy, that's the Israeli embassy, denied violating protocol. They said, we just went and we saw some stuff. The embassy said that engagements were humanitarian and that they were transparent, and they were because they were on social media. They showed everybody where they went. They did say that they're conscious of the humanitarian plights of many in these poorer communities, and that's why they were attempting to assist. But in typical fashion, government, because they're all Durko, like Islamist controlled, well, they're not very happy. And it actually led to the Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula, condemning the king. He stated that the ANC does not support Israel. And we know the ANC doesn't support Israel, but just because you don't support them doesn't necessarily mean in this instance that the king himself, who had gone there and created relationships, couldn't get some kind of benefit for his kingdom via these diplomatic norms. This is what the ANC doesn't understand. It doesn't talk for the whole of South Africa. It talks for itself, and the ANC is a 40% party. Now, Mbalula accused the king of acting against the ANC's Palestine stance. That's the point, isn't it? Now, the ANC referenced South Africa's RCJ case against Israel, and they said that the Umbatembu royal family had criticized the king's actions and they stood with the ANC, and there were apparently calls with royal structures questioning the king's authority. So the ANC basically wants to get rid of him, saying that, yeah, because he doesn't talk for the ANC, he's now a disposable asset. Do you see how this goes? Now, as you know, South Africa has an active RCJ case accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza. And the case is referenced repeatedly in the ANC statements as diplomatic dispute and international criticisms of Israel and all the other countries. They like to use this as almost like their modern-day struggle credentials. Now, Israeli officials publicly criticized South Africa's leadership, and diplomatic relationships between South Africa and Israel were further downgraded because of this incident. Now, you have to look at this logically. They've expelled the individual who's supposed to work between Israel and South Africa because they went to some communities in the Eastern Cape and offered humanitarian aid. And because individuals in South Africa, like this royal family, have been supportive of the Israelis, that means that they're now like the worst thing to ever happen to the country. They need to be impeached. And the ANC's position on Israel and Palestine is the only one that can basically be the predominant narrative for the country as a whole. This is the ANC yet again attempting to talk for all of us. And I'm reminded that the ANC does this a lot. In fact, I'm reminded that in 2017, the ANC went to Europe and effectively criticized white people for bringing crime into South Africa. In fact, you can have a watch right here.
Criminality has been in South Africa for more than 3 centuries. Especially after the colonialists came and brought crime from Europe to Africa. So you can't say the ANC brought criminality.
We're sitting in the UK, let's be clear. The British Empire did do exactly what you just said, but they did it to a lot of countries. Why is it South Africa has the 5th highest murder rate in the world in 2015?
I'm wondering who says that.
The United Nations, you may have heard of them. They're a big organization.
So what? I really think that we must see both good and bad. It can be said by the World Bank. The World Bank is not God.
But you see, this is what the ANC does. And we've seen this even in the ANC's approach to the US. Because according to the news, the South African anti-apartheid movement, I didn't even know what that was, the AAM apparently, well, they've urged Cyril Ramaphosa to reject the credentials of the new nominated US ambassador to South Africa, that's Leo Brent Bozell III. And they've cited that Bozell's pro-Israel position and his alleged hostility to multilateral institutions, that's the UN and all the kind of globalist bullshit that the US doesn't like. Well, according to the AAM, because he's a pro-Israel and anti-UN, anti-globalist bullshit, that apparently they should refuse his credentials to be the ambassador to South Africa, as if that somehow won't deepen the diplomatic fallout with Washington. But you see, they don't care. They don't care if you or I suffer. They don't care if the members of the nation don't have a job. They just simply don't care. All they want is their ideology, their position, their diplomatic ideas to be the overall narrative of the country, and for the rest of us to just shut up and go along with it. Now, Ramaphosa is expected to accept those credentials, but that doesn't mean that this pressure hasn't been put on Ramaphosa. Now, all of this comes at a time where trade and economic pressure from the US and South Africa is at an all-time high. As you'll know, that the AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, expired on the 30th of September 2025, and the act had previously granted duty-free access to over 1,800 products between South Africa and the US. Now, US Trade Representative described South Africa as a unique problem, and I've covered that in videos already. And the estimated AGOA benefit to South Africa, what we've effectively lost, is 2 billion rand. Now, the current trade value between the US and South Africa as of 2024 was 21.6 billion US dollars. And even with renewal of AGOA, the reciprocal tariffs would still apply. So we'd still have this kind of trade fallout between the US and South Africa. Now, the government has previously said that negotiating a new deal with the Americans was vital to the future of the economy. But the retards in government are like, oh yeah, expel the ambassador. Like, who cares about all the diplomatic protocols that we have? all the agreements we have that could mean that we could have economic trade. Who cares about trade and economics? And, who cares? Let's just, ideology and like daka, like durka. This is stupid. This is beyond stupid. Now, you know where else we saw stupidity? Well, we actually saw it around the Iranian naval exercises. You will recall that there was an Iranian exercise called the Will for Peace. Now, it wasn't actually an Iranian naval exercise. It was a BRICS naval exercise with Russia, China, and they included Iran. Now, Cyril Ramaphosa had instructed Iran to withdraw because of the hostilities between the US and Iran, but Iranian vessels still participated. Now, a board of inquiry has been appointed by the defense minister, Angie, who, if you know anything about Angie, she's just retarded. Aren't they all? But anyway, this inquiry is going to be chaired by a retired judge, because they're always chaired by a retired judge. And somehow that's meant to give the actual inquiry some form of legitimacy. And the inquiry is going to investigate whether the president's instructions were followed or possible misrepresentation or defiance within the SANDF. Because the reality is the SANDF got the instructions to make Iran withdraw. They just ignored Ramaphosa flat out. Because the problem is when you go around parroting ideology and telling everybody that somehow you must imbibe this ideology regardless of who you are, when you go against that ideology on the once off, like in this instance, the state generally tends to ignore you. And they're like, no, we love Iran because you told us to, and because we brain dead morons, we're just going to follow it regardless. Now, we have to take into account the SANDF because in other news, the SANDF, which is currently bankrupt, I need to stress that to you, they are dead, nothing works. Well, they have been budgeted approximately 372 million rand for a Defence Force Day event. Yes, a Defence Force Day event. Now, this is going to be held in Venda. It's the hometown of the outgoing SANDF chief. Approximately 7,000 soldiers are going to travel there. The travel costs alone and accommodation is going to cost 250 million rand. And they're going to have equipment to transport, because obviously they're going to have a big disco and stuff, and that's going to be 122 million rand. And the whole purpose of this event is just to be bye chief. It's basically a giant, huge piss up. The SANDF, which currently can't afford maintenance on their vehicles or bullets for the guns, they're all fat and overweight, they can't even afford a tent or security, are spending 372 million rand on a giant piss-up. But we're having an investigation on Iran. I mean, is this going to be another inquiry? This just shows you how skewed the priorities are with the state. But this is ANC, right? This is the ANC cadres all over. I mean, take the state's money and piss it up with Johnny Walker Blue Label. In any case, that's the news of today. So do let me know what you think of all this bullshit in the comment section below. Seems that yet again, ideology trumps practicality in the Republic of Retard Danistan. Anyway, until next time, bye.